Wed me, if you protect my child. The alien queen left me speechless, a human's impossible bargain. H2. Part 1. The Last Human Standing. The jungle smelled like burned metal and rain. P. Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole pressed his back against the cracked wall of the relay station and listened. The jungle around him was loud, full of strange animal sounds, wet leaves brushing together, distant thunder rolling across the sky of Arath 4. But Nathan had been here long enough to know the difference between the jungle being alive and the jungle hiding something. Right now, it was hiding something. He checked his rifle. 4 rounds left in the current magazine, 1 spare mag in his vest. After that, he had a combat knife, 2 smoke grenades, and whatever he could build from the junk inside the relay station. It was not much, but Nathan had made less work before. This was day 9. 9 days since his unit walked into the ambush. 9 days since he watched 6 good soldiers go down in a valley that the mission briefing had called low risk. 9 days since he became the only person left standing on this moon who wore a United Earth Defense Corps patch on his shoulder. He did not feel heroic. He felt tired and hungry and angry in a quiet, cold way that had kept him moving when his body wanted to stop. The Vreth Collective, the mercenary fleet that had sprung the ambush, kept sending scouts to check if he was still alive. Every time, he made sure they paid for the visit. By day 5, the scouts stopped coming in groups. By day 7, they stopped coming at all. But Nathan knew they had not gone away. They were waiting for him to make a mistake. He had not made one yet. On the morning of day 12, something changed. Nathan was setting a new trip line along the eastern edge of the station when he heard it. Not the controlled footsteps of Vreth scouts, but a crash. Something had hit the ground hard, maybe 200 meters north, deep in the tree line. He heard it a second time, like a piece of metal scraping over rock. He waited. No follow-up sounds, no voices, no weapons fire. He grabbed his rifle and moved toward it anyway. The Vreth would have expected him to stay inside the station, so he went outside. That was the kind of logic that had kept him alive for 9 days. It took him 15 minutes to find the wreckage. It was a small scouting vessel, not Vreth design. He did not recognize it at first, but the hull markings were elegant, almost decorative. Whoever built this ship, they built it to look like something important. Most of the left side had been torn open. It had clipped a ridge on its way down and spun into the tree line at low speed. The pilot was dead in the front seat, still strapped in, head down, not moving. Nathan was about to check for a power source he could use when he heard it. A sound, small, coming from the back of the wreck. He moved around the broken hull carefully, rifle raised, and stopped. There was a child inside. He was sitting on the floor of the rear cabin, pressed into the corner, both hands gripping his knees. He was not human. His skin was a pale silver blue, and his eyes were large and luminous, like 2 moons caught in a face that was maybe 10 or 11 years old by human count. He was wearing clothes that looked expensive, layered, patterned, with small gold details along the collar. One of his arms was bleeding through a tear in the fabric. He was terrified. Nathan lowered his rifle immediately. He held up one hand, palm open, the way he had learned to do in any situation involving a frightened child. Back on Earth, his younger sister had once told him that the open hand meant the same thing to every living thing. I am not going to hurt you. The boy did not run. He stared at Nathan with those wide, pale eyes and said something in a language Nathan did not understand. Nathan pointed to the boy's arm, then to his own field kit on his vest. The boy looked down at his own wound, then back at Nathan, and gave a slow, uncertain nod. It took Nathan 4 minutes to clean and bandage the wound. The boy sat completely still the whole time, watching Nathan's hands with careful, focused eyes. When it was done, Nathan gave him a ration bar from his vest pocket, one of the last ones. The boy looked at it for a moment, then took a small, cautious bite. His expression was hard to read, but he did not spit it out. Nathan almost smiled. Survival food tasted terrible to everyone, apparently. He could not leave the child here. The Vreth scouts would sweep this area within hours once they picked up the crash on their sensors. The relay station was not safe either, not forever, but it was the best option available. He picked up his rifle, pointed toward the station, and looked at the boy. The boy stood up slowly, tucked the ration bar into his own clothes, and followed. It took 3 miles of careful movement through the jungle to reach the station without being seen. Nathan carried the boy on his back for the last half-mile when the child's legs began to slow. He was heavier than he looked. Nathan did not complain. Inside the station, Nathan gave the boy a corner with a bedroll and set about reinforcing the outer perimeter. The boy watched him work for a while, then, somewhere in the quiet of the afternoon, fell asleep. Nathan sat by the east window, rifle across his knee, and kept watch. 2 more days passed. The boy grew less afraid and more curious. He began watching Nathan's every move with an intense, almost studious attention. Nathan taught him, using hand signals and slow demonstrations, how to eat a ration bar in small bites to make it last, how to fill a canteen from the condensation collector he had built on day 3. Small things, useful things. On day 14, the sky above HFY 4 filled with ships. Not Vreth ships. These were massive, dark and angular, with the same elegant hull markings as the crashed scouting vessel. They came in fast and low, and within minutes Nathan could hear the sound of boots hitting the ground in every direction around the station. He stood up, moved to the center of the room, placed his rifle on the floor beside him, not surrendering it, just making it visible and not raised, and waited. When the door blew open and a dozen heavily armed alien soldiers poured in, Nathan did not move. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, and looked at them. The soldiers stopped when they saw the boy. The boy stood up from his corner, said something sharp and clear in his own language, and pointed at Nathan. Every soldier in the room lowered their weapons. Nathan had no idea what the child had said. He found out later through a translation unit that the prince had told his mother's soldiers, "Do not touch him. He kept me safe." He also found out much later what the child's name was: Prince Sale, heir to the Ketharan sovereignty, the single most protected life in the outer quadrant. Nathan picked up his rifle from the floor, slung it over his shoulder, and asked if anyone had real food. "Wed me if you protect my child." The alien queen left me speechless. A human's impossible bargain. Part 2. An audience with the eternal throne. The ship they put Nathan on was the size of a small city. He had seen large vessels before. Earth had its own fleet, and some of those ships were impressive by human standards. But the Ketharan flagship, the Sovereign Veil, was something else entirely. Standing in the docking bay alone made Nathan feel like he had walked into a building, and the building had then kept going for another mile in every direction. The ceilings were so high that the upper levels were hidden in soft blue-tinged light. Everything was clean in a way that felt almost unnatural. No oil stains, no scuff marks, no clutter. Just smooth, dark surfaces and the faint hum of a power system so large he could feel it in his chest. He was taken to a medical bay and treated by 3 Ketharan doctors, who moved quickly and spoke to each other in low, clipped tones. They healed his wounds in about 2 hours, using technology that Nathan did not fully understand but deeply appreciated. The gash on his side, which had been bothering him since day 6 on HFY 4, simply closed up and stopped hurting. He pressed a hand against it afterward and almost did not believe what he was feeling. After the medical bay, they gave him a room. It was simple but clean, with a bed that was slightly too wide and a window that looked out onto open space. He slept for 11 hours without moving. When he woke up, there were fresh clothes folded on a chair near the door. They were not his uniform, but they fit well enough. Dark fabric, simple cut, no military markings. He put them on, checked that his rifle was still in the corner where he had left it, and sat down to wait. A Ketharon official arrived an hour later. Her name, through the translation unit clipped near Nathan's ear, came through as something close to Coordinator Leth. She was tall and formal, and looked at Nathan the way someone looks at a very unusual object in a museum. Not unkindly, but with undisguised curiosity. She told him he would have an audience with Queen Varen. Nathan asked what that meant exactly. Coordinator Leth looked at him for a moment, as if deciding whether the question was a joke. Then she said that it meant the Queen wished to speak with him personally, in court, in front of her full assembly. She said that this was not a common occurrence. She said, very carefully, that no human being had ever stood before the eternal throne. Nathan nodded and asked when. Apparently, she had expected more of a reaction. They took him through the ship in a long, quiet walk that passed through corridors, open galleries, and at least one chamber that appeared to be a garden growing in zero gravity. Small plants and flowers drifting slowly in the air, lit from below by a soft amber light. Nathan looked at it as he passed, and thought his younger sister would have loved it. Then he kept walking. The throne room was beyond anything Nathan had seen in his life. It was not a room exactly. It was a space, open, enormous, carved entirely from living crystal that caught the light and broke it into thousands of shifting colors. The floor was clear, and beneath it was a direct view of the planet below, Kethar itself, a world of silver oceans and pale clouds. On either side of the long central path, hundreds of beings stood in orderly rows, advisors, generals, priests, diplomats, attendants. Every kind of Ketharon rank and station was represented. The sound of that many beings breathing in one place created a soft, collective hiss that filled the enormous space like a tide coming in. Nathan walked down the center path in his plain dark clothes and worn boots, and tried not to let any of it bother him. At the far end, on a throne of carved white stone, set 3 steps above the floor, sat Queen Varen. She was not what he had expected. He was not sure what he had expected exactly, but it was not this. She was tall, with silver skin that had a faint glow to it, like moonlight on still water. Her hair was white and worn loose, which seemed out of place in a setting so formal. Her face was calm, not distant, not cold, but composed in the way that people are composed when they have been carrying large responsibilities for a very long time. She looked, Nathan thought, like someone who had not been surprised in years. She was watching him as he walked toward her. He stopped at the base of the 3 steps and stood straight. He did not bow, not out of disrespect, but because no one had told him the protocol, and he had decided that if there was a wrong thing to do, he would rather do it honestly than get it half right and look uncertain. She spoke. The translation unit in his ear kept up, a half-second behind her words. She thanked him for protecting her son. She said it plainly, without ceremony, which surprised him given the setting. Then she asked him how he had survived 11 days alone on Aerith 4. Nathan said he had been trained to hold a position. He said his unit had held worse ground for longer. He said it was what soldiers did. She asked why he had saved the child, a being from a species he had no bond with, in a situation where leaving the boy behind would have been the more logical choice. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said the boy was hurt and scared. He said that was enough. The throne room was completely silent. Queen Varen looked at him for a long time. Nathan held her gaze. It was not a challenge. It was just the way he listened. Then she turned to her council and spoke at some length. The translation unit caught most of it. Something about an oath, a title, a history going back centuries. Coordinator Leth, standing a few feet to Nathan's left, had gone very still. What the Queen was doing, Nathan learned in a rushed whisper from the coordinator, was conferring upon him the Catharin Oath of the Shieldbound. It was the highest personal honor in the sovereignty. It had been given, in all recorded history, to exactly 3 individuals. All 3 had been Catharon. All 3 had been dead for more than 200 years. Nathan stood there while the announcement was made to the full assembly. He looked out at the rows of alien faces watching him. Most of them looked stunned. A few looked angry. One old general near the front looked like he had bitten something sour. When it was over, and the ceremony had concluded, Coordinator Leth leaned close and told him in a low voice that the title meant he was now formally trusted with the life of the blood royal. Nathan looked back at the throne. Prince Sale had appeared at the Queen's side during the ceremony, standing straight, wearing formal clothes, looking steadier than Nathan had ever seen him. The boy caught Nathan's eyes and gave a very small, very deliberate nod. Nathan nodded back. He did not know yet what was coming. He did not know about the private audience that had been arranged for the following morning, or the offer that was going to be made, or the way that offer was going to move across the galaxy like a stone dropped into still water. He only knew that the kid was safe, and that the food at the reception afterward was finally hot. He had 3 servings. No one said anything about it. H1. Wed me if you protect my child. The alien queen left me speechless. A human's impossible bargain. H2. Part 3. The bargain that shook a galaxy. The private audience chamber was nothing like the throne room. It was small at least, by Catharan standards. A round room with curved walls, lit by a soft, steady amber light. There was a low table between 2 seats, and on the table was a set of cups and something warm and dark that smelled faintly like tea, though Nathan could not be sure it was. The room felt like a place where real conversations happened as opposed to official ones. Queen Varen was already seated when Nathan arrived. There were no guards inside the room, no advisors, no attendants, just the Queen and a slim translation unit mounted on the edge of the table between them. She gestured for Nathan to sit. He sat. She did not speak right away. She picked up one of the cups, held it in both hands, and looked at him the way she had the day before in the throne room, like someone doing a very careful calculation. Nathan waited. He was good at waiting. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been in court. The translation unit kept the same flat, neutral tone it always used, but Nathan was starting to pick up on the rhythm of her actual words, well enough to sense that she was choosing them carefully. She told him the truth. The ambush on Prince Sael had not been a random attack. The Vreth Collective had been hired. Someone had paid them, given them the prince's evacuation route, the timing of the escort, the precise window in which the convoy would be most exposed. The level of detail in that intelligence could only have come from inside the royal court itself. She was looking for a traitor inside her own house, and she did not know how far it went. She said her intelligence networks were compromised. She said she could not be certain which of her generals were loyal. She said she had people working on it, but the investigation was slow and careful for a reason. Move too fast, and the traitor would disappear and try again from somewhere harder to find. Until she knew who it was, her son was in danger. Not from outside the empire, but from inside it, and the people she would normally trust with the prince's life were the exact people she could no longer be certain about. Nathan listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, he asked one question. How many people knew the details of the evacuation route that was ambushed? She said, fewer than 30. Nathan nodded slowly. He did not say anything else about it yet. He just filed it away. Then she made the offer. She set down her cup. She looked at him directly. And she said, in plain language, with no ceremony around it at all, that if he agreed to protect Prince Sail until the boy reached the Ketharon Age of Ascension, which was approximately 4 years by human reckoning, she would take Nathan as her consort. She would stand beside him in front of the full assembly of the sovereignty and formally name him co-regent. The room was completely quiet. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He was not the kind of person who filled silence just to fill it, so he let it sit while he thought. Then he said, "Are you serious?" She said the Ketharon do not make offers they do not intend to honor. He said he understood that. He said he was asking anyway. She said yes, she was serious. Nathan leaned forward slightly and rested his arms on the table. He did not ask about the wealth that came with the title. He did not ask about the political power, or the size of the fleets he would nominally command, or what any of it would mean for Earth. Those things were not unimportant, but they were not the first questions. He asked 2 things. First, was the boy in genuine danger right now, at this moment, even here on the flagship? She was quiet for a second. Then she said yes. She said she had increased his security, but she did not know who among the security team had already been compromised. She said the danger was real. Second, was she asking him because she actually believed he could keep the prince safe, or because she had run out of other options, and he happened to be convenient? The Queen looked at him for what felt like a full minute. Outside the small round chamber, the flagship hummed with quiet power. Somewhere, far below, a planet turned. Then she said, in a voice that was lower and more careful than anything she had said before, that she had reviewed every piece of recorded footage from HFY 4. She had watched the 11 days of sensor logs captured by the relay station's own systems before they were recovered. She had seen what Nathan did alone, wounded, with minimal equipment, against repeated attempts by a professional mercenary unit. She said she did not believe in luck. She said she believed in patterns. And the pattern she saw in those 11 days was a man who did not quit, did not panic, and did not make emotional decisions in the middle of a crisis. She said, "I am not asking you because I am desperate. I am asking you because the data supports the decision." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "What does the kid want?" The Queen blinked. It was the first time he had seen her expression shift into something close to surprise. She said the prince was not part of this negotiation. Nathan said with respect that the prince should be part of it. He said the boy was old enough to have an opinion about who was keeping him safe. He said he was not going to spend 4 years protecting someone who did not want him there. It would make the job harder. The Queen considered this. Then she said she would speak to Sail. She spoke to the prince that evening. Sail's response, which Coordinator Leth reported to Nathan the following morning with a slightly bewildered expression, was, he already said yes on HFY 4. He just did not know the words yet. Nathan smiled when he heard that. It was a small smile, but it was real. He told the coordinator to let the Queen know, he agreed. Not because of the title, not because of the power, because the kid was still in danger, and Nathan did not leave a job half done. The news moved across the galaxy fast. Human governments received the announcement and immediately convened emergency sessions that lasted 3 days and produced no conclusions. Alien empires sent formal protests to the Ketharon court. 2 minor factions threatened to dissolve their trade agreements. 1 ambassador reportedly fainted. And the Vreth collective, upon learning that the human soldier who had held their scouts off for 11 days alone was now the officially sworn protector of the most important child in the outer quadrant, placed a bounty on Nathan Cole's head. The number was the largest single bounty in recorded galactic history. Nathan was informed of this during breakfast. He asked for more eggs. The attendant serving him, a young Ketheron who had clearly been listening to every word, stared at him. Nathan said please. He finished breakfast. Then he went to find out where the prince's quarters were, and whether the overnight security rotation had been changed since the previous week. It had not been changed. He changed it himself that afternoon. The 4 years began quietly, but Nathan Cole had long ago learned that quiet never lasted. Wed me if you protect my child. The alien queen left me speechless. A human's impossible bargain. Part 4. The Impossible Bodyguard. The Ketheran Royal Guard thought Nathan Cole was strange from the very first day. They were not wrong. He did not behave the way a protector was supposed to behave. He did not stand still in a doorway with his arms crossed and his chin up the way the Royal Guard did. He moved constantly, checking windows, checking sightlines, walking the corridors at irregular hours, pressing his hand against walls to feel for vibrations. He mapped every room in the prince's residential section within 48 hours of arriving. He memorized the names of every staff member, every attendant, every person who touched the prince's food or handled his clothing or walked the same hallway at the same time each day. The guard captain, a tall Ketharan officer named HFY War, watched all of this with polite confusion, and then asked Nathan, through the translation unit, what exactly he was doing. Nathan said he was looking for patterns. HFY War asked what kind of patterns. Nathan said, the kind that don't fit. That was the first and last time HFY War questioned his methods. Back on Earth, Nathan had a contact he trusted more than anyone in the royal court. Lieutenant Clara Webb had served with him for 3 years in Earth's intelligence division before he was transferred to the Defense Corps. She was not a soldier in the traditional sense. She thought in systems and connections and data flows, and she was better at finding hidden information than anyone Nathan had ever worked with. He sent her everything, every piece of internal communication that passed through the channels he had access to. Every staff rotation log, every supply order, every visitor record. Clara built a map. Slowly, over weeks and then months, patterns began to emerge. Small inconsistencies in reporting, gaps in communication logs, expenses that did not match official records. It was slow work, but Nathan was patient. He had learned patience on Arath 4. In the meantime, he did something else that no one had expected. He trained the prince. Not in Ketharan statecraft or ceremony, in practical things. How to notice when a room feels wrong. How to use your body to make yourself a smaller target in a crowd. How to fall correctly so you do not hurt yourself. Basic hand-to-hand movements. Not enough to make Sale a fighter, but enough to give him options if someone grabbed him. The royal court was scandalized. Several advisors formally objected. One senior priest submitted a written complaint to Queen Varen, arguing that physical training was beneath the dignity of the heir. The queen read the complaint, set it aside, and asked Nathan how the training was going. He said the prince was a fast learner. She said, good, and went back to her work. Sale took to the training with the same intense, focused attention he had shown that first day in the relay station on Arath 4. He was not a natural fighter, but he was disciplined. And he asked good questions. The kind of questions that showed he was actually thinking, rather than just going through the motions. One afternoon, about 8 months in, Sale asked Nathan why humans were so good at fighting. Nathan thought about it for a moment. Then he said, we are not always good at it. We just do not know when to stop. Sale considered this seriously, the way he considered everything. Then he said, is that a strength or a problem? Nathan said, yes. The first assassination attempt came 14 months after Nathan took the job. It was during the prince's evening meal. Nathan had a habit of watching the way food was served, not the food itself, but the process. The order of the dishes, the positioning of the plates, the angle of approach by the serving staff. It was the kind of detail that most people did not notice, because it was always the same. That evening, it was not the same. One of the junior attendants, a young male named Veth, who had been part of the staff for 6 months, placed the main dish slightly to the left of where it always sat. It was a small thing, barely visible. But Nathan had been watching that table for 14 months, and he knew exactly where every plate was supposed to go. He crossed the room in 3 steps, moved the dish away from the prince before Sale's hand reached it, and asked Veth, calmly, to stay where he was. Veth ran. He did not get far. The guard had the doors. The dish was tested. The food had been treated with something that would have caused a slow, untraceable deterioration in Ketharan physiology over a period of weeks. It would have looked natural. No one would have known. Nathan handed Clara the attendant's full employment file and personnel history that same night. 3 weeks later, Clara had found the thread. Veth had a family member with financial ties to a minor noble house in the outer court. That noble house had connections to a trading consortium that had, in turn, been quietly funneling resources to an inner court faction for the past several years. The thread was thin, but it was real, and it led somewhere. The second attempt was louder. It happened at the Prince's Orbital Retreat, a residence used for formal seasonal ceremonies, set in a station above the 4th moon of Kethar. 16 hired fighters came in on service vessels that had been cleared through security using authorization codes that should not have existed. Professional, coordinated, and clearly briefed on the layout of the station. They had not been briefed on Nathan. Clara, monitoring the security feeds remotely from Earth, caught the irregularity in the service vessel approach pattern, 11 minutes before the fighters breached the outer hull. She sent Nathan a 2-word message, "Company coming." Nathan moved the prince to an interior room with no external access, handed him a short-range communicator, and told him to use it only if Nathan stopped responding. Then he sealed the door and went to work. The next 4 hours were not clean or easy. Nathan took a hit to his left shoulder in the 2nd corridor, and another graze across his ribs near the 3rd junction. But he knew the station's layout better than the people trying to navigate it in the dark. And he had spent the previous 2 months quietly adjusting the lighting controls so that specific sections could be dimmed from a handheld unit. When it was over, all 16 fighters were down. None had reached the interior room. Nathan sat against the wall outside the prince's door and pressed a cloth against his shoulder. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Sale looked out. He looked at Nathan's wounds. He looked at the corridor. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor next to Nathan, and stayed there until the medical team arrived. Nathan did not tell him to go back inside. The thread from the first attempt had grown into something solid by the time Clara called Nathan in the early hours of a morning near the end of the 3rd year. Her voice was steady, but Nathan had known her long enough to hear the tightness in it. She had been taken. Someone had tracked the flow of information and found her. She was being held at an off-grid location. The message delivered to Nathan was simple. Step away from the prince. Leave the sovereignty, and she would be released. Stay, and she would not be. Nathan put down the communicator. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he went to Queen Varen. He told her what he needed. 1 hour, 3 warships, and full authorization to act without restriction. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Done." What happened in that hour was not something Nathan ever described in detail. Clara never discussed it either. But she was back at her desk on Earth within 48 hours, and the mercenary cell that had been holding her did not exist in any recoverable form after that. And the name that Clara had been close to uncovering, the name at the center of the conspiracy, it was now confirmed. High Advisor Drevin Salketh, the Queen's own cousin, a man who had sat at her side in court for decades, who had attended every ceremony, signed every accord, and spent 30 years positioning himself to step in as regent if the prince died young. The Queen received the name in silence. Nathan watched her face. She was still for a long time. Then she said quietly, "Bring me the evidence." Clara had all of it ready by morning. The 4th year passed without incident. Nathan did not relax, but the work was steadier now. The traitor was gone. The network had been dismantled. The threat was not zero. It was never zero, but it was manageable. Sale, now 4 years older than the frightened boy on Aerith 4, had grown into something Nathan was quietly proud of. Not because of the statecraft or the ceremony or the things the advisors taught him. Because he was kind. Because he was thoughtful. Because when something was wrong, he wanted to fix it rather than explain why it was someone else's problem. One evening, near the end of the 4th year, the prince asked Nathan if he was nervous about what was coming, the ascension ceremony, and everything that came after it. Nathan said he was not a nervous person by nature. Sale said, "I know, but are you nervous about this?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "A little." Sale nodded like that was exactly the right answer. "Wed me, if you protect my child." The alien queen left me speechless. A human's impossible bargain. Part 5. The day the bargain was honored. The morning of the ascension ceremony, Nathan woke before dawn. Not because of a threat, not because of anything Clara had flagged, or any irregular pattern he had noticed. He woke up because he had not slept past 4 in the morning in roughly 4.5 years, and his body had simply decided that was how things were now. He made himself a cup of coffee from a small machine he had brought from Earth on his second resupply run. It was the one personal item he had insisted on. The Ketharon had offered him a dozen different warm drinks over the years, some of them quite good. But nothing worked the same way as a plain cup of coffee in the quiet of a dark room before the rest of the world started moving. He sat in his chair by the window and looked at the planet below. Kethar turned slowly in its orbit, the silver oceans catching the light of its sun. He had looked at this view hundreds of times over the past 4 years, and it still felt slightly unreal to him. Not in a bad way, just in the way that some things never quite stop surprising you, no matter how many times you see them. He thought about Aerith 4, about a relay station with cracked walls and 4 rounds left in a rifle magazine, about a kid in a corner with wide, frightened eyes and a bleeding arm. He thought about how different things could have been if he had walked away. He finished his coffee and went to check on the prince. Sale was already awake. He was sitting at a small desk near the window of his own quarters, dressed halfway in his ceremonial clothes, reading something on a flat display. He looked up when Nathan came in. There was something calm about him. Not forced calm, not the kind that people put on because they are afraid, but real calm. The kind that comes from knowing who you are. Nathan looked at him for a moment and said he looked ready. Sile said, "I have had good preparation." Nathan did not say anything to that, but something shifted in his chest in a way he did not try to name. The ceremony itself was held in the crystal chamber, the same room where Nathan had walked down the long center path 4 years ago, in plain dark clothes and worn boots, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes. The room was fuller now. Representatives from 40 species filled the gallery rows. Every senior member of the Ketharan court was present, and through a live transmission feed, the ceremony was being broadcast to every human settlement, every allied station, every inhabited corner of the known galaxy. Clara Webb was watching from the small apartment on Earth. She had made tea, which she did not drink, and she sat in front of her screen with her arms wrapped around herself, and her chin resting on her knees. Nathan stood at his usual position, to the left of the prince, one step back, watching the room. It was where he had stood at every public event for 4 years. Most people had long since stopped noticing him standing there. That was exactly how he preferred it. Prince Sail stood before the Eternal Throne and delivered the words of ascension, a formal declaration in Ketharan, old ceremonial language that Nathan did not fully understand. But the translation unit in his ear kept pace. The prince spoke about the history of the sovereignty. He spoke about duty and responsibility and the weight of leadership. All formal, all expected. The court listened with the composed attention that Ketharan nobility always wore in public, like a second set of clothing. Then Sail paused. Then he said something that was not in the prepared script. He said the most important thing he had learned during his years of preparation was not law, and not history, and not statecraft. He said it was something much simpler. He said he had learned that courage was not about the absence of fear. It was about acting clearly and honestly, even when everything in you wanted to stop. He said he had been shown that, not by a teacher or an advisor, but by a man who ate bad food and slept in 3-hour intervals, and had never once, in 4 years, asked for anything beyond what the job required. He did not say Nathan's name. He did not look at him. He did not need to. The court was very still. Several of the older advisors, beings who had attended 100 such ceremonies, and had long since stopped being moved by them. Rael Vor, the guard captain, was standing perfectly straight and looking at a fixed point on the opposite wall, with the concentrated focus of a man who was refusing to feel something. The formal portion of the ceremony concluded. The titles were conferred. The oaths were spoken. Prince Sail was declared before the full assembly of the Ketharan sovereignty and all the watching galaxy as the legitimate heir to the eternal throne. Then Queen Varen stood. She stood from the eternal throne. She descended the 3 steps to the floor. In all of recorded Ketharan history, the reigning monarch had never descended from the throne during a public ceremony. It was simply not done. The throne represented the continuity of the sovereignty itself. To leave it voluntarily, in public, was an act so significant that half the assembly did not immediately understand what they were seeing. She walked across the crystal floor toward Nathan. The room had gone from still to something beyond still. A complete, held silence. The kind that happens when a very large number of people are all thinking the same thing, and none of them are breathing. Nathan watched her come. He did not move. She stopped in front of him. She was taller than him by a few inches, and her silver eyes were steady and direct. The whole galaxy was watching. She did not seem to notice or care. She said, "The 4 years are complete. The bargain stands. I am here to honor it." The silence pressed in from all sides. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I have a question first." Somewhere in the gallery, someone made a very small, choked sound. Coordinator Leth, standing near the edge of the platform, closed her eyes briefly. Nathan said, "Do you actually want this? Not because of the bargain, not because it is the logical outcome, because you want it." Queen Varen looked at him, and for the first time in 4 years, for the first time since he had met her, the composed surface of her expression changed in a way that was small but completely real. Not a performed shift, a genuine one. She said, "I have ruled this sovereignty alone for 93 years. In that time, I have made every decision by weighing the data and accepting the most reasonable outcome. I have never wanted something I could not calculate first." She paused. She said, "I cannot calculate this." Another pause. The whole galaxy waited. She said, "I want it anyway." Nathan nodded once. He said, That works for me. The crystal chamber came apart in sound, not chaos, but the collective exhale of hundreds of beings releasing a breath they had been holding for several minutes. There were voices, movement, the formal percussion of the Ketharan ceremonial ensemble beginning somewhere above. Sale, standing on the steps of the throne, where he had just been formally ascended, was grinning. It was the first full, unguarded grin Nathan had ever seen on his face. It made him look exactly like the frightened boy in the corner of a crashed ship, except with 4 years of steady ground beneath him. On Earth, Clara Webb laughed so hard she knocked her cold tea off the table. She left it there and did not stop laughing for a while. Across the galaxy, in a poorly lit operations room that no longer officially existed, the remaining administrators of the Vreth Collective looked at each other in silence. Then the senior member reached across the table, pulled up the active contract file for Nathan Cole, and quietly closed it without a word. Some debts were not worth the interest. The ceremony moved into its formal conclusion. Titles were announced. The gallery began to settle into ordered celebration. There were speeches to come, banquets, the long, careful machinery of political ceremony doing what it had always done. But in the quiet at the center of it all, Nathan Cole stood where he had always stood, one step back, watching the room, and let himself just for a moment stop counting threats. The planet turned outside the crystal walls. The silver oceans caught the light. Somewhere in his memory, a frightened kid in a corner asked for help in a language he did not speak. He had said yes then. He would say yes again, every time, without thinking twice. That was the thing no empire had ever fully understood about humans. They did not calculate the value of the frightened child in the corner. They just picked the child up and carried them. And sometimes, the child turned out to be a prince. And sometimes, that was only the beginning of the story.